In this video, we're taking a look at how to correctly distribute expenses over multiple years in your financial models. Make sure you stick till the end because I'm going to show you one of the best ways to ensure that your formulas are correct and you didn't miss something important when writing them. We have a complex formula to write, so let's dive straight in. Normally, when we're modeling, we'll have different expenses or costs for 2024 and 2025, for example, and those will be easily identifiable and we can put them in the specific column in our model. However, what happens when we have a specific cost, for example, a project that's associated with a specific time period? For example, this here is from May 1st to February 7th next year. And in a lot of circumstances, we can estimate or even guesstimate. For example, here we might say, oh, this is just 1 month in 2025. So we can just assume that the whole thing is in 2024, or we can say this is about half a year. So we'll just put half here and the other half here. But if we want to calculate and present this accurately, we have to account for those start and end dates and prorate the cost according to this in 2024 and in 2025. I have this prepped in Excel. So essentially here we have 4 projects in our assumptions with the respective costs and the start and end date. And we want to allocate the cost in each year. In order to do that, we have to calculate what portion of this cost falls within this year, and there should be nothing in 2026 since it's ending in 2025. And the way I usually like to handle that is not based on months, because those dates are specific dates, so I wouldn't count months in each year and prorate it that way. I'll calculate the total days of the project, and then I'll split those days between each year so that I can prorate correctly the cost and I can calculate the total costs in each year respectively. In order to do those calculations here, the first thing we need is the days in each of the periods, and you can just type those, but I like using a formula for that, and I actually like using a specific formula, the date formula. So I'm going to say I want to create a date, and this date will consist of this year here. Those are numbers just formatted to have calendar year in the front. And then I'll just pass the month and day like that. And I'm going to subtract again this year, and the 2 month and day will be 1, and I get 365. And you might not notice it here because 2024 is a leap year, but if you copy it to the side, you see that you get 364. The reason is that we're subtracting from the last day of the year to the first day of the year, so we have to add 1. So now we get 366. And if we copy it over to the side, 365. You might say it's a bit of an overkill, but I just like things to be like neatly calculated. Even here, if you see that this is not 2025, this is the previous period plus 1. And I'm using simple custom formatting to just add the calendar year in the front. Now, before we start calculating this, I want to do that in a single go, in a single formula. So here I'll be calculating the number of days that this project will be going on in each year, and down below we'll prorate the cost. And this is where the complex formula would be. And in order to make that days calculation, we'll be using this formula. Let me put it here on the side, and let's start going through it and understanding what's happening. We're starting with an if formula, and our condition will be either the start date is after the current year or the end date is before the current year. If this is the case, we'll just return 0 because there's no days that fall within this year. Then if that's not the case, we'll check if the current year, so this thing here, is above the year of the start date. And let me jump down here. If it's not above the year, then it means it's the same year. So we'll just create a date with the current year and December 31st and subtract the start date, this here, and that way we'll know the number of days that this is happening within 2024. However, if it is above the year of the start date, then we have to compare it to the end date. So we're no longer thinking about the start date. If the current year is then above the year end date, then we need to return the days of the current year, because remember, in this case, the year that we're looking at is after the year of the end date. Then we return the full days here. Otherwise, if the current year is not after the end date in a subsequent year, then we want to check if it's the same year. We're then grabbing the days current year and subtracting the difference between the end of this current year and the end date. So after the end date, those days, we're subtracting them from the total days for the year. And otherwise, if it's not equal and not above, the current year is before the year of the end date, then we're just returning the entire number of days for the year. Okay, now let's write it out and see what it looks like. Here we're gonna say equals, and start with if, and within this if, we'll have an or. Then we'll say year, the start date, check if this is above the current year. Or the other option is that year, the end date is below the current year. If any of those are true, then we're returning 0. Otherwise, we're starting this if here, and here we're saying if current year is above the year of the start date, close the bracket, we'll check if this here, our current year is above the year of the end date, then we'll return the days of the current year. Otherwise, we'll check if our current year equals the year of our end date. We're gonna give the days in the current year minus, I'm gonna open bracket, and here we're gonna build this date. So date, my current year, 12/31, minus my end date. I'm gonna close the bracket, and otherwise, this here will just return the full number of days. Close this bracket, close the bracket from the previous if, and otherwise, here value if false, we're giving date from the current year, 12/31, minus the start date. We don't need to close two more brackets, and this is our formula. And it tells us that in 2024, this project is running for 230 days. And you can easily check that. So let's say if I have here 31st of December, 2024, I can just calculate here this minus the start date is 230 days. Now let's edit this formula and fix a few things so we can easily copy it across. So for all the start and end dates, we want to fix the column. I'm just gonna add a $sign. Then for all the years and the days, we wanna fix the row. So here I'll fix the row 11. Here it went ahead and essentially for everything that's in column I added a fixing $sign in front of the row number, and for everything in column D and E, I just fixed the column with the $sign before the letters D or E. And I can easily copy this to the side and then copy it down, and we get our number of days. Our total days would be our end date minus our start date, and here let's see if this minus the sum of those four is 0. Expand it a bit, and let's copy that to the bottom, and we can see that our calculations are correct. Now we can use those days to prorate our cost and allocate the cost. I'm gonna say here that I want this to be equal to my number of days in this specific year divided over the total days for this project, and the total days, I'm gonna fix the column so it would go down with the rows, but it won't move to the side when I calculate for the next years. And I'm gonna multiply that by the cost, the total cost, and I'm also gonna fix the column here. Then we can copy that to the side and copy it down. And if I sum those, copy that down, you can see that we have the exact same values as our total costs for the project here. And this is a way to essentially correctly allocate costs based on a start and end date when you're doing your financial models and you're working on the basis of years, which is usually what we do when we are doing forward-looking financial models. but this allows you to more correctly allocate those time-based costs. However, when we're doing this formula right now, you might have noticed that we're actually missing a case. And this case is what happens if this is also in 2024. So if the start and end date are in the same year, our calculation is wrong. Let's make it even simpler. Let's make it 15th of June. So just 1 month, and we're still getting 230 days in here. And the reason for that is that nowhere in our formula we're checking to see if the start and end date are within the same year. And we can incorporate that in here, but it will get way too complex. So the easiest way to do that is to just consider this as one case and then have another if that wraps it, that's another entire case. So essentially I'm going to grab this whole thing without my equal sign and cut it. This will be one case of our formula. So one case would be if those are within the same year, and another case will be this whole thing that we're doing here. So I'm going to say if, I'm going to say and, want two logical conditions to be true at the same time. If the year from the start date, I'm going to fix the column with F4 is equal to my current year. I'm going to fix the row, and the year from my end date, I'm going to fix the column again, equals my current year. I'm going to fix the row here. So if those two conditions are met, it's pretty easy. I just want to have the difference between those two, and I actually have to fix the columns here. And otherwise, if this is not true, then we can just go ahead and do all our previous calculations. I'm going to close the last bracket, and this should work. Let's copy it to the side and copy it down. Now, if we switch that back to 27th of August 2025, you see that we're still getting the same result as we were before. But now if we have a project that's within the same year, like for example here, we can make sure that our formulas are working correctly. I've updated the formula reference here on the side. So essentially everything that we were doing was from here all the way through here. And what we're doing now is first checking if both dates are within the current year. We're just taking the difference between the end date and the start date, and then we're doing all those nested ifs down here. I'm pretty sure there are more optimal ways of doing that, but whenever I'm writing more complex formulas, I always try to keep them following some sort of like almost like the way you would think about it, because then it's much easier to understand what we're doing later when we have to adjust something or when we have to double check for errors. Additionally, making the habit of stress testing your assumptions. So this would be like a stress test. What we just did here is, okay, none of those are within the same year. So let's see if we place them in the same year, would that break our model logic? Of course, in a lot of cases, you can just split this calculation in a few different steps, but in some specific situations, you might want to have like more complex calculations, either to make a better impression or to make the model look more professional or something similar to that. Of course, this is something that you would definitely save as part of your model's documentation. Now that you know how to correctly distribute expenses over multiple periods in your financial models, check out this video to learn the #1 mistake I see beginners make when it comes to financial modeling. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in this video.